Well, hello, lovely people. How's it going? Hey, all right, some thumbs up. Hey, woo! All right, see, I appreciate that, Robert. Okay, I appreciate you. Okay, some claps, some thumbs up. All right, so today, everyone, what we're going to be discussing is we're going to be talking about contributing CLAs, like contributor licensing agreements, and also licensing. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, okay? First off, before we start, I have to tell you this. If you didn't know this, I'm a senior software engineer at Spring Health. I'm not a lawyer. I know, right? Very shocking. Who would have thought? Not me. Okay, so, but just, in all actuality, I'm not a lawyer. So in terms of anything, in terms of licensing or anything like legally, or anything legally like related or legal related, I say consult a legal professional. So, again, when we're talking about CLAs and licensing today, this is just to share knowledge needed like by developers when it comes to signing, contributor licensing agreements and checking the license agreements for open source code. Okay, so when we talk about this, again, I know it sounds like a really boring topic. I'm going to try to make it fun. Might throw in some jokes. All right, no promises. All right, no promises. But just wanted to give you that quick disclaimer, and let's go ahead and dive into this session, okay? Because I think we're a little bit behind, but let's have some fun with this, okay? So, as a quick overview of this talk, I just wanted to go ahead and just give you a quick overview of what we'll be discussing today. The first point is I'm going to talk about contributing to open source, okay? And the next topic, as I said, we'll be talking about open source licensing, which is like pretty much the meat and potatoes. Always interesting saying that saying, meat and potatoes, okay? But as I said, we're going to be talking about open source licensing, like what are the different types of open source licensing, stuff like that, right? I think we're going to be going over, if I'm not mistaken, going over 3 today. And you may have heard about maybe 2 or 3, all 3 of them. May have heard of 2, may have only heard of 1, all right, or none. And that's all right. Today we'll be covering the 3 most common open source licensing agreements or whatnot, or like open source licenses. Next up, afterwards, we'll then dive into CLAs, which are contributor licensing agreements, right? Why are they important? Okay, and what's the significance of them when it comes to contributing to a project? Next up, after that, we're going to be discussing accounts, right? So if you're contributing, let's say, for example, at one point, I'm actually do the very same thing. So when I was at Microsoft, I actually used my personal GitHub and I kind of integrated my work GitHub as well too, right? Just doing my work contributions through my personal GitHub, right? So personal versus company. I do the same thing at my current company, Spring Health, where I actually tied like a lot of all my work contributions are also tied to my personal. But like, how do we sort of, make sure we don't really mix both? Do you want to have a separate one for company? Do you want to have a separate one for personal? Do you want to mix both? Like, what are the pros and cons of all of that? So we'll discuss again, accounts and everything like that. So using your personal account or a company account when it comes to contributions. And also different ways to contribute, right? So in open source, I think when we think about contributing, we always think about contributing to like let's say, for example, the compiler or like the core of some sort of project, but you'd be very surprised. There are different ways to contribute to open source. Open source isn't just the core code that you see. There are many, many other avenues of contributing to open source, and we'll dive into that as well. That being stated, last but not least, some extra tips, because every presentation needs to have some extra tips at the end. So with that being stated, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, I keep saying this, okay, because I don't want to get sued. I'm a nice person. You're all nice people. Okay, at least I think so. Everyone said hi to me. Okay, so just as clarification, this is not legal advice. You hear me? I am not a lawyer. I did not take the bar exam. I didn't even fail the bar exam. You can't fail something you never took. So yes, so this is not that. So again, although we'll be talking about legal issues, I am not a lawyer. And if you are ever unsure, please consult a software lawyer. Okay, so just do that. All right, I'm not that software lawyer. I'm just a software engineer. Okay, so there we go. Now, first point, contributing to open source. Now, when you make a contribution to open source, like to an open source project, you can be, to all intents and purposes, like anonymous. All right, so it is possible. And the project team is usually a small team of volunteers working for free. So if you've ever seen any of those major projects out there, I think the top 100 open source libraries that are used are, I think, contributed by, maybe like 1 or 2 different people. I want to say it's a very small sum. You'd be very surprised. There's this whole thing called a bus factor. We don't want to dive into that. But yeah, a lot of our major open source libraries and frameworks that are used in today's world or whatnot that we use, it's all pretty much by 1, 2, sometimes even a very small team of, let's say, if you're lucky, even 5 people. And so, yeah, and they're all working for free, which is absolutely insane, right? But it's fun. So with that being stated, right, we're gonna talk, as I said, a lot of these individuals who, again, as they build out these really popular frameworks and libraries, they need to be able to protect themselves and also the code that they write, which is why contributor licensing agreements and also just licensing in general, a lot of this stuff is very important. So again, just wanted to put that out there, but sort of just thinking about this and just wanted to put that out there, okay? Which sort of dives us into licenses. So if you've ever, has anyone here, by a show of hands, built out a project using some sort of programming, like a framework or a library before? Has anyone here built out any projects before? How many? By show of hands, anyone? Okay, sweet. Okay, sweet, awesome. See, you probably used a library maintained by maybe one person. Okay, you might have maintained one, 1 by 2. Okay, but a lot of these frameworks and libraries have these different licenses. So if you were to go to let's say, for example, in the JavaScript ecosystem, there is a project that I absolutely love this framework. It's called Vue.js, or even if you've looked at React as well too, right? We'll look at Vue.js. It's a really cool, intuitive, small framework that's used by many JavaScript developers. If you go to the actual core page, you'll see that there's there's a license that they have, right? And the license that they have is an MIT license. Okay, so is anyone here familiar, or has anyone ever heard of the MIT license before? Show of hands. Does anyone here want to explain what the MIT license is? Just take a go at it. Yes, Jim in the back. No, what, really? Okay, I was really digging it. All right, anyone here want to try to explain what the MIT license might be? Or just... Exactly, right? So if you ever have the MIT license, I kind of think of it as, you know what? Well, for me, if any of my projects were MIT licenses, I think of it along the lines of, as you said, do whatever you want, okay? You can do whatever you want. If you want to build out some extravagant commercial software on top of this, you can, but that's all on you, okay? Don't sue me, essentially. But it's sort of is ways of saying, hey, this is free, this is open for you to use, do whatever you want. But again, I'm not responsible for, I guess, the code or anything that happens sort of further down the line or whatnot, right? In terms of legality. So it's sort of hey, this is open. Here, take it, use it, and this is here for the community. Okay. Then you have the Apache 2.0. I kind of think of it as, hey, you can do all this stuff, but kind of want to, maybe consult a lawyer. If someone has an Apache 2.0 license, it's hey, you can do all this, but I kind of, whenever I think of Apache 2, Apache licenses, it's hey, you can do this all, kind of like the MIT, but ... They can add their own stipulations, okay? So it's something to be relatively aware of in terms of the Apache 2.0 license. And then last but not least, we have the GNU GPL version 3.0, okay? There was a 1 and 2. Now there's a version 3. Okay, and this one is along the lines of, hey, if you, correct me if I'm wrong, but this one is along the lines of saying, hey, since my code is open source, if you use my code, if I'm not mistaken, if you use my code further down the line, that part of where you're actually using my code, you have to open source that part of whatever you're building, whether it be commercial software, any part that uses my code, you have to open source that as well, okay? So it's along the concept of saying, hey, this is open. I want to keep that sort of downstreamed as well too. So if anyone is familiar with a lot of these different licensing or these, I forgot. Does VS Code use the GNU? I can't remember off the top of my head. No, it doesn't. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to take a look. But code that actually uses a lot of libraries and code, or people that use it. NVIDIA, for example, when it comes to their graphics, their drivers and stuff like that. Certain parts of it is actually open source because the people, a lot of open source maintainers use the GNU GPL license. Say, hey, if you implement this part of my library, it's open source here. Please just maintain that, okay? So that's essentially when I think of the GNU GPL one. Yes. It's MIT? Okay. VS Code is MIT. All right. Thank you. So with that being stated, let's look at these one by one. And I kind of jumped a little bit ahead. So let's start with the MIT, right? The MIT license is a very permissive license, right? You can do whatever you want with the code, use it for free, use it for commercial use, whatever you want. The only requirements are that you preserve the copyright to the original or of the original code. Okay, the code is copyright. The code is copyright the product. Oh my gosh, I JavaScript better than I English. I apologize, y'all. Okay. Oh man, I'm struggling today. All right. So the code itself is like copyrighted and everything like that, but anyone can do anything with it. Okay. So you can publish it yourself under a different license or as compiled code. So you can do anything you want with it, right? The project also has no liability for anything that goes wrong with the code. So if you unfortunately miss a zero and someone's bank account gets drained, it is not that person's problem. Okay, it is yours. And there's also no warranty. Okay, it'd be kind of preposterous to have someone who's maintaining one project to have a warranty on every single person who is consuming that library or framework. Yeah. Long story short, no warranty. And if the code doesn't do what it says or breaks your billion-dollar business, the project is not liable and you cannot sue them. Okay. So that's that. You also can't claim a patent on a derivative work or whatever. Or so if you use the MIT code on a product that you try to patent, essentially you can't do that. Okay. So does that make sense? So as you see, we have like these lovely green bubbles, the blue bubble and the red bubble. Okay. So just sort of condensing that, what I just stated, into something a little bit more just easier to sort of consume. Okay. Oh yes. Question? I'm sorry, can you say that? Are they not yeah. Oh, like you said security issues? Yeah. Oh yeah, no, they're not liable for anything. So you decided to use it. Yeah. They're providing it for free, and it's like saying, hey, we're providing this for free. We're not reliable for anything, but hey, this is something free, right? I think it's on the individual's duty, not the maintainers, but the people consuming it to go through the best practices. If they see a security issue, I think the biggest thing is like, again, raising an issue, right, on the GitHub project, or even try fixing it yourself and putting in a PR. But you're not reliable. They're not liable. I said reliable. Oh my gosh. Okay. Next up, we have the Apache License 2.0. So it's a very permissive license, similar to the MIT license, keep in mind. But like the MIT, you can do whatever you want with the code. Use it for free, use it for commercial use, whatever you want. The only requirement is that you are to preserve the copyright of the original code, okay? So again, as you can see here, these lovely bubbles, permissions, commercial use, distribution, modification, patent use, private use as well too, right? You do get the ability to do all of that. But also, like the MIT license, the code is like copyrighted, like to the is copyright. I still can't get this. Okay, so it's still copyrighted to the project, but anyone can do anything with it. You can publish it yourself under a different license or as compiled code. Again, like the MIT, the project also has no liability for anything that goes wrong. So again, if you have a security vulnerability, that project is not responsible. Okay, the maintainers of that library, framework, or whatever it is not responsible. And we have a question. Yes. Oh, and GitHub, right? So if and this is where we'll get into CLAs, like contributor licensing agreements, right? So if anyone decides to contribute into that project itself, right, that when you do like things like that, it sort of goes hand in hand. Contributing licensing agreements, it's like hey, saying I agree, this code is now officially part of that project, and so that person who's contributing wouldn't be held liable. Or in the project itself, hence the Apache 2.0 license, which the project would be under, also isn't liable. The project itself wouldn't be liable with. Does that sort of make sense? Or is that sort of what I'm getting from what you're wanting to, what you're asking? Oh, if you were to submit something and contribute to a project? Oh, use it in your own code. Oh, so mhm, mhm, yeah, yeah. So yeah, whenever I consume a, if I ever consume a project or library, I typically label my stuff as like MIT, right? So anyone, if you all wanted to, you can all like go and you can pull my project, you can use it, right? And I could consume a project, you know, a lot, some sort of other open source project, make some modifications or whatnot, and essentially, you know, again, I could have it as an Apache 2.0 license or you know whatever those lines. But typically, a lot of my stuff is MIT, so it's like open for anyone to use. So I kind of like reciprocate that. Now, if it's like a commercial product and I'm consuming that library or whatnot, that's again, you want to, depending upon what type of license you want to be aware of. Okay, so yeah, but yes, yes, I will answer it to my best non-lawyer ability. Please. hmm Yeah, yeah, yeah. Correct. Yeah. hmm Yeah. hmm Yeah. No, it is specifically that part. So we'll get into the GNU, but it would be, if I'm not mistaken, it's specifically that part of the product, right? That you need to make sure you have open source. Wherever this library is actually being used inside the code, right? Like actually specifically those files or whatever, that specific part of the code needs to be open source, not the entire project, right? Because how do you do that? So, like for example, if you import a library and use that within specific files, you have to open source that part of like you know of your product or of your project. Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh huh. So you can, I mean, you can figure out ways. Obviously, you're not trying to publish your secrets or anything like that, right? So you can turn this into a more, you can package it up. There's like, again, like, and this is where I guess like when it comes down to building out your project, where you have specific paradigms, certain patterns and whatnot to help consolidate and isolate that bit of functionality into a specific, could be file or set list of files or whatnot, and then you would sort of you can publish that specific part. So like, what would you do? For me specifically, if I'm thinking about this, I would probably, um, this is where I would do something like where I would probably either take a part of like my code base, I would extrapolate that, turn into its old sort of package that my initial one would actually implement, right? And then I would publish that package itself and just make sure I re-implement that package within it. I guess you know that's at least that's what I would do, or how to go about doing that or whatnot. If it again, if it's GNU or something like that, right? Yeah, if you're using. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, thank you. See, he's more of a lawyer than me. All right, I like this. Okay. But yeah, so again, like the biggest difference, again, MIT and Apache is that the Apache license grants you the right to file patents on the derivative work. With MIT, you can't really do that. The Apache, you actually can, right? This means that if you use Apache license code in your product, you're able to apply for a patent if your idea is like novel enough, right? And the Apache license grants this, whereas the MIT is noting or is nothing, or is it in the MIT license that allows you to patent on derivative works, okay? So you can't actually do a patent. You cannot patent an MIT, but you can patent an Apache license. That's like the biggest difference. So the next one that I wanted to sort of go over is the GNU General Public License and version 3.0, okay? And the GPL, for short, again, General Public License, GPL, is a copy left license. So copy left means like granting freedoms to those who use your work, but making those who use it also grant the same freedoms to others, okay? So essentially, you can use GPL license code as, again, you see fit. You can even sell the product that uses the GPL code, all right? But you must distribute the full source code of your product so that the purchaser is able to modify and distribute it as they see fit, okay? So it's just sort of keeping that same downstream of saying, hey, if I'm going open source, you have to make sure you go open source. If that person's going open source, whoever is consuming that, they have to make sure they abide by open source, essentially this license and everything like that, okay? But for in-house products, they're pretty much that are not released to the public, you don't need to release the source, essentially. So again, yeah, so if it's like an in-house product, if it's like, I'm trying to think of like something internal, right, that you would use. You don't necessarily need to like, yeah, so like HR systems, essentially. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, HR systems would be a great example of that, right? Something internal. So you don't need to actually release that code to the public because it's something that's being used internally. But if you do have something, if you are selling a product that is external, you need to make sure that you keep the same downstream of, as the initial one, I guess like source code, the initial project or whatever, just that inherits it or whatever from that one to the other ones as well. Just making sure that you just abide by keeping it fully open sourced, okay? So that's pretty much that. Now, the downside of GPL. So although GPL code makes code free and simple to use, it restricts the ability for folks to use your code in a commercial product, as they may not want to distribute the source code, as that may contain corporate secrets, okay? So I was gonna say Microsoft Teams, but I don't really know. I didn't take a look at that code when I was working here. They had that locked down. But most companies ban the use of GPL license code in their products, rightfully so, right? Because if they use GPL license code, they have to open source the entirety of, if I'm not mistaken, like open source the entirety of that product. So some workarounds are to build separate programs, as I stated before, or components. So taking, again, as I stated before, what I would do is that I would build out a library that sort of inherits like that interacts with that specific piece of code, and then inject that library that I interacted with. That'll be fully open source, but and then inject that back into the main application. That way, that part is fully open source. That way, I'm not fully open sourcing the entire project. Kind of what I stated earlier, right? So that's a workaround, right? So essentially, components or programs that call each other. That way, you only need to release the code of those components for in the system or for that system specifically. So, for example, Linux is free, but you pay for enterprise versions with tools built on top of that that are not covered by the GPL. So hopefully that makes sense. I know, right? Legal talk is so much fun. It is amazing. But this is also very important because the last thing anyone here do, I don't want y'all to get sued. Being sued is not fun, okay? I don't know this firsthand, all right? I'm a very stand-up developer over here, okay? So I want to make this very clear, okay? But being sued from what I've been told, what I've seen, okay? I've seen Judge Judy. It is not fun, okay? So next up, we have software bills of materials, okay? So bombs, okay? Yes, BOMs, okay? There's moms, there's bombs, and then there's, Toms, people named Tom. See, okay, there we go. All right. Software bills of materials. Software bills of materials are a big thing. Some governments insist on them when buying software. Anyone here familiar with this at all before I jump in? You are? Oh, please do tell. Would you like to give a quick explanation or anything like that? Or just like give your little rundown of saying, if you I'm sorry, can you speak up a little bit? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, really? Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's very important. Again, yeah, insist on buying. Yeah, so that's actually very important. That's really interesting, though. So fun. Yeah. Yep. I like that. Okay, yeah, no, thanks for explaining that. It's actually funny because when I thought about this, I'm like, when I first saw this, I'm like, huh, you never really think about this, right? When you're building out software, there's a lot that I don't think about when building software, right? Until you start educating yourself on that as an open source maintainer or contributor and whatnot. And so, yeah, this is really interesting in seeing the later half and whatnot. But yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Huh. Interesting. Wow. Okay. Well, thanks. I appreciate the insight. Actually, this is awesome. 10 out of 10. Okay, 10 out of 10. I appreciate you. You know, we might switch. We might switch roles next time. Okay, I like this. Okay. Yes, I like this. Yeah. So again, software bills of material. Again, thank you for the rundown. I actually really appreciate that. And because I've never actually really done actively done things like that side, right? Especially working for governments, and so it's interesting. But yeah, long story short, some governments insist on them when buying when buying software. So partly corporations use these to monitor for supply chain attacks by knowing what goes into their software, so they can monitor for security vulnerabilities. This is very important because I think what Microsoft does that, Spring Health, my company Spring Health, we do that, right? And so yeah, it's pretty much just to partly ensure that there's license compliance, right? So hey, are we doing are we in compliant with a lot of the different licenses for the software or packages or libraries, whatever it is that we use, right? And we want to make sure that you want to make sure that you are compliant because also as a corporation or as a government entity, again, Judge Judy, you don't want to get sued. Okay, I don't want to be on that. What is that? Channel 3 now? I don't even know. But but yeah, there's a problem when component A is released under the GPL, right? Then used by component B, that is then used by component C under the GPL. All these components must be released under the GPL, right? So this is hard to track with deep hierarchies of dependencies. And so this is really important of just saying, hey, let's go through, let's find, hey, in terms of making sure hey, are we compliant with all these, with whatever we're using, whatever components that we're using? Are there any red flags that we need to, keep in, just be aware of, right? When it comes to using this specific component, package, library, anything like that, right? And let's make sure we stay compliant when we're ingesting those and using that to build our application. So, yes. So does everyone understand that for the most part? Okay. All right. Bobble is like a yes. Some's like a little bit, some no, maybe yes. I don't know. Okay. All right. We'll continue. Don't worry. Afterwards, if we have questions during lunchtime, we can ask that. Okay. Now, no license. We have quite a bit of time. Should I try to speed this up a little bit, Jim? I know. Okay. Gotcha. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump through some stuff. All right. So there's no license. What if there's no license? Long story short, just don't use it. Okay. Protect yourself. Don't use it. If it doesn't have a license, you should, huh? Well, if there's no license, then you probably don't have rights to use it. So don't. You could ask the author actually. Yeah. Great. And that's where you can actually raise an issue saying, hey, this project doesn't have a license or whatever. But for the most part, if you're saying, hey, I want to actually ingest this or whatever, I'd recommend not using it, essentially, because you probably don't have the rights to actually use it, right? Licenses typically give you the explicit use of saying, hey, you can use this, right? And so if you don't have that explicit, consent of saying, hey, you can use this, more than likely, you probably don't want to use it, more than likely. But again, raise an issue, put it on an issue and say, hey, can you put this under a specific license? That way we know what are the limitations that we're able to actually, that we should or should not be using this, right? And how we can use this. So that's that. Changing a license. So what happens if we change a license? If the code is released as one license, then what if you want to change it, right? And if I'm not mistaken, that happens per version. So if this newer version actually, if the license gets changed or whatever, let's say if version 1.0 was MIT, version 2.0 was Apache, and you're saying, hey, I was really relying on the MIT one, right? Then you'd probably just want to do, I guess, have a fork or just specifically use the 1.0 license, that or version 1.0 of that specific project. Okay. So again, check with a lawyer. Yeah. So check with a lawyer and all that stuff. Long story short. Now, you also can't change from GPL. I just want to make that very clear too. Correct me if I'm wrong. So you can't change from a GPL license But you can change from like I think the others as well too, like MIT and Apache and everything like that. So yeah, is that. Now CLAs, contributor licensing agreements. This is pretty much an agreement between open source projects and it's all its contributors. So fun fact, when I contributed to open source, I had to actually sign a CLA that stated like, hey, when this code is merged, whatever code you're committing or whatnot, do you agree to say, hey, this is actually going to be part of the project? It is not yours anymore. It's actually the project's code. So if I put in a bug fix, more than likely, when I put in things like bug fixes or whatnot, right? It's stating that this is actually going to be under the license under that specific project, right? I actually don't own that code anymore, all right? I'm a contributor, but this is an agreement stating that, hey, they're pretty much, designed to protect open source projects from any claims of copyright infringement, okay? So license breaches or any other legal issues, okay? So it's actually to cover them, but also to cover you as well too, all right? So it pretty much just defines ownership of code, all right? So does that make sense? Awesome. So CLAs are defined by, again, ownership. We look at protection, right? So those two things are very important. Who owns it? What does protection look like? Like who's actually, what is it? Yeah, it's important for ownership. Who owns it? Protection, like what exactly is protected or whatnot, or who's being protected. Again, it's for protection for both you and also the project as well. And those two things. Next up, ownership. When you submit code to an open source project, who actually owns the code, right? This is where CLAs come into play. Do you own it? Is it your unique intellectual property? Is it owned by your employer? If I wrote this code on company time, then your company more than likely owns it, right? When you re-sign your agreements or whatnot, right? It specifically states that, right? I don't own if I'm writing code for let's say Spring Health, right? I don't own the code at Spring Health. Spring Health owns the code that I write. If I'm working at Spring Health, and typically that's signed like the legal agreements and all that stuff before you start your employment and things along those lines, right? And it's required for you to sign before joining. Same thing with open source or whatnot, right? When you have a CLA, something very similar. So if you do commit this code, if you have this, right, you sign your CLA, it's saying, hey, at this point, whatever, you agreed that the company or the project itself, this is actually to be covered under the project itself. So again, as I stated, in terms of ownership, the project would own this code and it would go under the project. Next up, let's see. Oh, interesting. So again, part of the CLA is declaring that you have ownership of the code and are allowed to submit it to the open source repository. I could show you, for the sake of time, I'm going to speed this up because we need to continue. Also, again, it's also a transfer of ownership. All right, so the CLA defines what happens when you submit the code, right? So it shows a transfer of ownership. So when you sign that, it's saying, hey, I'm party A. This is going to party B. This CLA is defining that I'm actually transferring this, this CLA is part of the whole idea of transfer of ownership. Okay. So once the code is submitted, it becomes the property of the open source project. So again, just kind of reiterating what I stated earlier. Also, protection. So the CLA protects the project. All right. So if you submit code that you are not allowed to submit, then you're the one to blame, right? Not the project, and you can be sued, not them. Reverse Uno card. Okay. And so, if your code infringes on any patents, you're liable, not the project. Okay. So this is also something in terms of protection, which is very important. So please don't submit copyrighted code to an open source project. Plot twist, you're going to be liable, not them. Okay. And that's also why you have the commit history as well too. Okay. Git blame is there. Oh, I don't like calling it blame. I know you said you don't like calling it, but this is at this point, that is actually a blame. Okay. So yes. So, and once you submit that code, you can't revoke any license and stop the project from using your code. Okay. So remember, most open source is run by volunteers in their space or in their spare time with minimal funding. Okay, so don't be that person. Okay, the CLAs protect them, those free, lovely, volunteer, underpaid individuals. Hence me wearing the shirt that says "Pay the maintainers." Okay, but that's a whole different story. Okay, but it's like my favorite shirt. But yes, so this is funny. I love this. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this, but all modern digital infrastructure, and it says a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. This is actually, it's as funny as it is, it's actually very true. You'd be very surprised. Open source software by some random people that are saying, I'm going to build out this library, could be, yeah, what is it? Yeah, which is absolutely insane. Sheet.js, all this different, there's so many different libraries out there. I'm just like, wow. So you're the reason why I'm able to like use this specific project. Wow, thank you so much, right? So yeah, you'd be very surprised. Open source software generates trillions of dollars for companies, honestly, right? Trillions of dollars for the global economy and whatnot. And this random dude could be random lady from like Nebraska, could have been you know, over there, right? In Washington, okay? You could be maintaining some really amazing open source project, and you were that little peg right there, okay? You know, so yes. So with that being stated, again, be nice. But yes, this is actually true, okay? Signing CLAs, any project that requires you to sign a CLA will have a bot set up. This is very true. That's typically the case. Pretty much automated. So yes, I actually had to do that for, I think, possibly Microsoft. I know even for like open source projects I've contributed to, I had to actually sign this. And yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process for the most part, and it's nice. So yeah, that's that. How do I get started with CLAs? I'm going to speed this up. Again, an example of CLA, you can go to this right here, opensource.microsoft.com/PDF/Microsoft Contribution License Agreement, .pdf. Okay, there we go, boom. But you can get started there, okay? Example of CLA. So here's an example of, from the Microsoft CLA. I'd open it. We're just going to speed this up a little bit. You represent that of each of your submission is entirely your original work, okay? So just make sure it's original work. That means you were stating that your code is your own work and you own the copyright or license. It also has a clause that if they also have a clause that if they are not your original work, then you have to share all the details and licenses for the code you submit to prove that you were allowed to submit it. Okay, so saying, hey, if this isn't your original work, if this isn't it, like, please give us the information that's necessary for us to say, hey, like, that you actually were allowed to submit it, right? So just having all that detailed there, all right, to protect not only you, but also especially the project as well, okay? Less headaches for that one person in Nebraska. So yes, that's that. Again, you grant, so yeah, I'd go through this. I want to open this, but I'm just going to go ahead and skip this real quick, all right? Contributing. So if you start an open source project, you must choose a license if you want folks to contribute to your code. They know what requirements there are on the end of users, pretty much other contributions essentially. So just choose a license, go with that. Choose wisely, okay? Please do. Again, GPL may reduce the chances of your code being used. All right. So if you are familiar, as we stated before, from GPL, if you choose a GPL, it's probably not. It reduces those chances significantly because probably people who use that want to, let's say, commercially distribute and sell things, they have to open source, that part of it. So it may reduce your chances of it being used. MIT and Apache, especially MIT, is most commonly used license out there. So if you contribute, make sure you are happy with the license that has been chosen. Okay. Confused? Well, first off, as I said, always consult a lawyer. But yeah, for commercial use, always check with a lawyer. As a general rule, you can use MIT and Apache license code, but be wary of others. Okay? You can find more details and see a license comparison at choosealicense.com. Literally, go there. Choosealicense.com. It's a wonderful website. It's great. Shows you the pros and cons. So yeah, check that out. Next up, we'll go into personal versus company. So when you make contributions, is there a difference between doing it on your own time or company time? Are you allowed to make contributions? Yes and no. Depends on the company. Literally, depends on the company. Okay, it's really weird. Same with software decisions. It depends. Okay, so be aware of that. Company contributions. So when you contribute as a representative of your employer, you have to act as that employer. All right. If I'm contributing things like under Spring Health time and all that stuff, I am not Spring Health, but I have to act essentially under the guise that I'm an engineer that is under Spring Health. So therefore, what does that exactly entail, right? If I'm doing this during on company time, right? When you sign the CLAs, you have to do so as an employee of your employer. Okay. Now again, I'm not a giant Spring Health like a giant S or whatever. If I'm working at Microsoft, I'm not with a giant M. But it was funny the last time I did this, right? But anyway, yeah. So you're an employee of that employer. So just be aware. Some roles require you to contribute. Some roles don't. But if you use open source projects, it's nice to give back and honestly, just have some bug fixes, right? People appreciate that. So fix a bug. Be a nice open source contributor, okay? Be that person. So, but yeah. But before you start contributing, if you are doing this under the guise of you being under a company, check with your corporate legal team before making any contributions if it's not part of your role, okay? So just be aware of that. I know some, actually, fun fact, some companies actually are saying, hey, if you work at this company, any code that you submit, both inside our work, but also outside of it, is actually ours. So be very aware whenever you actually turn down, I think, 1 or 2 companies in particular because of that. I like contributing to open source, and they're saying, and essentially, I forgot what, I'm not going to shout companies out here, right? But there are some major companies that specifically state saying, hey, if you do contribute code outside of work, you have to actually go through an entire approval process. Other companies saying, hey, you do whatever it is, just don't do that to a competitor, yeah, whatever it is, right? But a lot of companies are pretty lax. There's some companies I've actually turned on offers from because it's saying that, because they stated that any company that you own, that you contribute to or write or whatever, we own both outside of our job, outside of the company, but also inside the company as well too, right? And you sign that clause, during the employment process. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know actually. The first time I know for companies, typically companies are pretty chill. A lot of companies are, not every company. So be aware. Actually, this is why you should always read the documents before you actually start signing lines or whatnot. Because I remember at one company prior to one of the companies in the past that I worked at, I made it a detail not to contribute anything during work hours, make modifications to any of my open source stuff during work hours, right? But I could actually go in and I could actually present like whatever I did, like inside the actual company itself, right? Because again, you also have to make sure like, hey, if this is under company time, it's probably company owned. Other companies, again, as I stated, I did not actually sign for. Actually, I didn't. I literally said no to a couple of companies. It would have been great and all that stuff, but it was specifically along the clauses of saying, hey, you know what? We own all of your code, and if you don't want us to own it, you have to explicitly go through an entire approval process to say, oh, well, we greenlight this project. You can go ahead and contribute, right? And so, just be aware. Read the actual legal, like all that legal stuff whenever you sign a company agreements, and because the last thing you want to do is be in an accidental lawsuit, like, oh, I didn't know, stuff like that. So just be aware. Any questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I simply said to the company, okay, I have this, I want to continue maintaining it, and they just
yeah.
So you contract everything negotiable up to the stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. You have to get it cleared by legal in some instances, but you're right in that. But
you are doing some work for
but
the company.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
So it's so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, if you start, and also you're right, and totally also being aware too of like conflict of interest. Like I actually went to, when I worked at Microsoft, I actually went to CLA to say, hey, I'm contributing to this project. We're also doing something internally. Like, hey, like what do I need to do to make sure that I'm not at like a conflict of interest? So actually reach out internally to your legal department too, because again, I was like, well, I don't want to get accidentally sued. I like my life. I like my employer. Okay, I don't want that to happen. So I went to CLA, right, which is like Microsoft's legal team, and I asked them specifically about that, right? The same thing when it came to my current company as well too. Before I signed or whatnot, I said, hey, this is what I do. Is this okay? I'm currently a contributor here, or I've done some, I'm maintaining here or whatnot. Like, is this all right? They were like, all right, cool. So things like that, right? And just being aware of those. So just check with that. Personal contributions. So some employment contracts state that your employer owns any intellectual property you can create even outside of work, as I just stated. Therefore, any open source contributions you make will be subject to their rules. Okay. So again, there are some companies, tech companies in particular, that do that. Microsoft was pretty good. Like honestly, Microsoft was very good about in terms of like open source contributions. They're pretty, I'd say over the past like years, they've gotten so much better in terms of like just being able to contribute back to open source. And they even encourage it too, at least from, the teams that I was on when I was there. So So again, if your employment contract does not give your employer rights to your, to your own IP, then make sure not to use company resources to make the contribution. Okay. So just being very aware of that. All right, as I stated before. So personal versus work GitHub accounts. Should you keep your personal work and GitHub accounts separate? I personally keep them together. Don't worry. You're probably wondering, oh my gosh, Austin, you're like, mixing two crazy things and things are going to go insane. But, everything's pretty good for the most part. Again, did it in Microsoft perfectly fine because, again, it's under the guise of what I'm doing, right? Microsoft has an actual, same with Spring Health. Spring Health that I work at, there's an actual organization that I'm a part of inside of that, and I make contributions to the repositories inside of that specific organization, the GitHub organization, right? Same thing when it came to Microsoft. That was also the same thing. I made contributions to the repositories inside of that. So although I had my personal account, mostly because I have the attention span of a squirrel, and I don't like logging out and logging back in. It just makes things a lot easier for me personally, right? Less things to manage. I've mixed both my personal and also my professional GitHub account, and I just made sure that I made contributions to specific repositories during certain, work hours, whatever, under, let's say, Spring Health or whatnot, and just making sure I stick to that and not doing any open source stuff unless it's like necessary and all that stuff. Okay, and it also relates back to like the company, right? But yeah, just being aware of that. I also know many individuals who have a GitHub account that's for their personal and a GitHub account for their professional. And that's very common too. So it all depends upon preference. Again, check with your company's legal team, see what that is. Again, both Spring Health, prior to also Microsoft will too, but Spring Health also, where I work at, they're like, it's perfectly fine. Okay? So you can do whatever. So yeah, just be aware too. I know some downsides, your SSH keys or even access tokens on like non-company hardware, just sort of make sure that you have like a separation of work and personal, all right? And a separation of work and non-work stuff, all right? And just make sure that's the case, right? From the keys that you use and all that different stuff. So yeah, because of like signatures. Also how to contribute. So there's different ways to contribute, all right? I think when I talked about this before, there's so many different ways of contributing to a project. We all think of like, oh man, if I'm going to contribute to React, I got to like work on the actual core library itself, right? And no, you don't actually. There's many different ways. There's documentation, right? You can contribute to an open source project via documentation, governance, all right? So, you can help govern things, maintain, in terms of like non-code related stuff. Design, so you can actually help improve the design of an open source project. A lot of open source projects definitely need some better UX and UI related things, okay? Some TLC need to be had in most open source projects. So UI, UX, again, very similar. Advocacy, so advocating for a project, saying, hey, this is a great project. Let me tell you why it's a great project, all right? And give you a 30-minute presentation on why this is the best project in the world, all right? And then code, something we're very familiar with, writing code, okay? So there's much more than just writing code, right? Again, I'll tell you about my open source origin story, how I actually got started to being a major contributor to an open source project. It actually started with documentation, which is like crazy. You're like, wow, really? But yes, it's great. We'll go into that later on. But contributing to docs, why? Can I go and skip over this, Jim, if that's all right? I'm going to skip over all this. Last but not least, extra tips. Have fun. Protect you and your work. That's very important. And also be kind, all right? So when you're contributing to open source, just be a nice person, all right? That actually goes a long way, even just not only just contributing to open source, but also just in general. All right, so that's that. And yeah, so remember, be kind, be a good person. Thank you. And that's the end. Whew. Went a little bit over, just a little bit.